I'm Warren Holleman. Last week I posted a photograph of the beautiful new Apex Friendship High School, and I promised to come back and say a word about how the community got its name. Well, it's an amazing story, and actually, to put all this in perspective, you have to realize that when people like me were growing up in Apex, Apex only had 1,000 people. But in the rural communities around Apex, there were many times more people. And so these rural communities all have a rich history, and they are essentially now Apex history since Apex has expanded to incorporate them. And Friendship is certainly no exception. The history of Friendship goes back to around 1830 when two groups of people began migrating to that area. And I would say two groups, two cultures that were rather disenfranchised in the South. The first was Native Americans. The ones I know of came from West Virginia, around Wheeling, West Virginia. The other group was what is called free issues. A free issue is a person who is of at least some African descent living in the South prior to emancipation and the Civil War, Emancipation Proclamation and the Civil War, living in the South, but who is not a slave. It would be an individual who had been granted freedom for one reason or another. And so you have these two groups of people that are kind of looking for a place where they can be and where they can be safe and that they can call home. And they gravitate to this area called Friendship. So how did it get its name, and what's that story? Well, sometime, it's not clear when, some think it was before the Civil War, others think it was right after the Civil War. There was a community meeting, and they did three things. They smoked a peace pipe, literally. They vowed to live as neighbors, and they decided to call their community Friendship. My friend Lewis Powell says it was just common sense and enlightened self-interest. We're here. It's in our interest that we get along. Let's do it. And Friendship is a great name. Lewis's argument that it happened right after the Civil War makes some sense to me, because if you look at some of the deeds and documents of that era, you'll see instead of the word friendship on some of them, you'll see the word Jordan's siding, which is a strange expression. And so we did a little research on that, and we found out that Jordan's siding is really not at all the name of the community, but it was written on a wooden box beside the railroad tracks in the community. And that box held firewood that was used to fuel the train as it traveled from Haw River to the Raleigh area and back. And apparently, whoever built that box or whoever put wood in the box was named Jordan, so he put his name on it, Jordan Siding. And nobody knows who Jordan was. He could have worked for the railroad, or he could have been some businessman who went around the country building these boxes for the railroad. So it would make sense that if people were starting to call our community Jordan Siding, that we would want to get control of this and make it clear that Friendship is a better name. And the reason it's a better name is that it really was a place where these rather disparate and disenfranchised communities came together. Friendship is an intersection actually in two ways, literally and figuratively. Mr. Force Stewart was the first person we know of to migrate from West Virginia to the area back around 1830. And he built a tavern there and an inn. And he was a smart businessman. It was a great place because it was the intersection of two important roads of that day. One was the Raleigh-Haywood Road, and the other was the Hillsborough-Smithfield Road. They were all vibrant communities in the early 1800s. Haywood, most vibrant of all, but today little is known about it. It was located a mile or two from the present-day location of Moncure, and it actually came within one vote of being selected over Raleigh as the capital of North Carolina. You see, back in the really early 1800s, before the railroads were built, the main way the goods were gotten to central North Carolina was through the Cape Fear River and then the Hall River. And once they got to the falls of the Hall River, which are near Moncure and Haywood, they had to turn the boat around, and they would unload it there. And so that was a very important inland port city prior to the building of the railroad, which took place around 1869, 1870, 1871. So it was an intersection commercially, and Tommy Stewart, if I said Force Stewart, I'm wrong. Mr. Tommy Stewart was a smart businessman to build his tavern there. But it was also an intersection in terms of the ethnicities of the South. It was a place where they all got together and they literally got along. The two disenfranchised groups I mentioned, and then the more common groups, the white people and the black slaves. They all lived there, they all smoked the peace pipe, and they said, let's get along. Now, I mentioned Mr. Tommy Stewart and Mr. Force Stewart, and let me explain who Force was. He was a force within that community when I was a young child. He was one of the patriarchs of the community, he was quite a businessman, just like his grandfather, Tommy Stewart. I believe Tommy was his grandfather. It may have been his father. And then the other patriarch of the community in my childhood was Professor Tommy Wilson, who was a leader in the churches and the schools of the community. And my father had the foresight in the late 60s, early 70s. Actually, my father grew up near there as well. So he grew up hearing these stories that had been passed down through the oral traditions of the community. But he wanted to get it from the horse's mouth, so to speak. And so he sat down with these two leaders of the community whose grandfathers had been more or less the founders of the community and said, give me your version of the story. And what I just told you about the peace pipe and the vowing to live as neighbors and calling the community friendship is verbatim what both of those men said that they learned. One from their grandfather, who identified as Native American, and the other who I believe identified as a free issue African American. Now, so that's the story of friendship. It's an amazing story, and I gotta say that friendship is really just one of about 15 or 20 rural communities surrounding Old Apex. And as time goes on, I'd like to tell the stories of some of those other communities. I hope you enjoy learning about the history of Western White County. And if you want to learn more, my brother Toby and I will be at the Eva Perry Regional Library 2 Mondays from now. Monday, February 26th at 7 p.m. And February, as you know, is Black History Month, and we're going to be helping celebrate Black History Month by giving a presentation on African American history in early Apex. We're going to tell some very interesting stories. We've even got a couple of actresses who are going to help us tell some of those stories, and I think you'll love it. We'll also bring copies of our book, and this is what the book looks like if you haven't seen it, and we'll be selling those for about $20 each, I believe. So look forward to seeing you, and until then, this is Warren Holleman, and I believe that Apex and friendship and all of Western White County is absolutely amazing, and I hope you do too. Thank you.